I mentioned wanting to start a scholarship fund in my wife's name. My daughter-in-law scoffed, "Stop trying to be a hero, you're not leaving a legacy, you're leaving a mess." My son said, "She didn't mean it like that." I canceled the meeting. But the next week she got a letter from the university with a dedication that didn't include her name anywhere, and when she saw who it did. "I am Daniel Marquez and I am 72 years old, and I have learned that silence is the loudest thing a man can carry. I have been carrying it for 8 years now, ever since Alina died in the blue morning light of a Tuesday in October, her hand in mine, her breathing gone soft as paper. I did not fall apart the way people expected me to. I did not cry at the funeral where everyone else did. I stood very straight in my dark suit, and I shook hands and I said thank you when people told me she was in a better place, and inside I felt like a building whose foundation had been quietly removed. I just had not yet fallen down. That is the thing about grief that nobody tells you. Sometimes it does not arrive as a flood. Sometimes it arrives as erosion. It takes a little piece of you every morning until one day you look in the mirror and you barely recognize the man standing there. But I kept going. I kept the house. I kept the routine. I kept the photograph of Alina on my desk at work even after I semi-retired, even when people stopped asking about it, because that is what I knew how to do. I knew how to hold on. So when I decided, 8 years after her death, to create the Alina Marquez Memorial Scholarship Fund at the university where she had taught for 22 years, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. It felt like breathing after holding my breath for too long. Lena had spent her entire career tutoring students who could not afford extra help, staying late after classes, buying textbooks out of her own paycheck, writing recommendation letters at 11 at night because she believed with everything she had that education was the one thing nobody could ever take away from you. She used to say that. She would be washing dishes at the sink and I would come into the kitchen and she would say, "Daniel, the one thing they can never take from you is what you know." I thought about that sentence almost every day after she was gone. I thought about all the students she had touched, all the lives she had shaped quietly and without fanfare, and I thought about how unfair it was that her name would just fade away while the world kept spinning. I did not want her name to fade. I wanted it to mean something permanent. That was my flaw, if I am being honest with you. I have always needed things to be permanent. I hold on too hard, I always have. Alina used to tease me about it. She would say, "You would frame a grocery receipt if I let you," and she was not entirely wrong. The meeting with the university representatives took place in a conference room on the fourth floor of the administration building. The table was long and polished and reflected the overhead lights. There were 3 university officials on one side, and on my side I had brought Aaron, and at Aaron's quiet insistence, Leela. I had not wanted Leela there, that is the truth. But Aaron had said, "Dad, she's family, she just wants to be involved." And I had swallowed my opinion the way I had learned to swallow it, which was with water and without expression. Leela had been Aaron's wife for 6 years. In those 6 years she had systematically, gracefully, and without ever raising her voice, rearranged my family like furniture in a room she had decided to redecorate. She was 38 years old and she was very good at seeming reasonable, while making unreasonable things happen. She had a way of framing her interference as helpfulness. She had a way of making her control feel like care. And Aaron, who had always been a gentle and conflict-averse man, had over the years drifted in her direction the way a boat drifts when one oar is stronger than the other. I had watched it happen and said very little because Aaron was an adult and because Alina had always told me not to push. "Let him find his way," she used to say. "He always does." I was still waiting on that. The meeting had been going well. The university officials were enthusiastic. They had slides prepared. They spoke about the criteria for the scholarship, the application process, the annual award ceremony. I sat with my hands folded on the table and felt something warm and unfamiliar in my chest, which I eventually identified as hope. And then I picked up the pen to sign the initial draft agreement, and that was when Leela said it. "Stop trying to be a hero, you're not leaving a legacy, you're leaving a mess." The room went very quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that comes after something breaks. I looked at her across the table and she had that tight little smile on her face, the one she wore when she said something she knew was sharp but had wrapped in a tone that gave her deniability. Aaron was staring at the table. The university officials were doing that careful, professional thing where they look at nothing in particular and wait for the discomfort to pass. My hand was still holding the pen. I could feel the weight of it. I could feel the weight of everything. "She didn't mean it like that," Aaron said very quietly to the table. I looked at my son and I saw, not for the first time, that he had chosen his comfort over his convictions. I did not blame him, I understood it, but I also felt it in a place that was already sore. I set the pen down, I capped it slowly. I slid the unsigned papers back toward myself with 2 fingers and I stood up. "Meeting's over," I said, and then I walked out. Behind me, I heard Leela say, very softly, the word dramatic. It was meant to land like an eye roll, like a dismissal, like the punctuation mark on a sentence she had already won. She was wrong about that, she just did not know it yet. I drove home alone. I did not turn the radio on. I sat in the particular silence of a car moving through city streets and I thought about what had just happened and I thought about Alina. and I thought about the way grief and anger, when they combine in a person who has spent 8 years being careful and quiet, can produce something that is neither of those things. My jaw was tight. My hands were tight on the wheel. I am not a man who explodes. That is not my flaw. My flaw is the opposite. I go cold. I go methodical? Alina always said that was scarier than yelling, actually. She said, Daniel, when you get that look on your face, I feel like I'm being studied. And she was right. That is exactly what I do. I study, I calculate, I wait. By the time I got home and sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, I had already made several decisions. Aaron called that evening. I was expecting it. Dad, he said, I'm really sorry about today. She worries about finances, you know how she is. I held the phone and looked at Alina's photograph on the shelf across the room. Her hair was down in that picture. She was laughing at something I had said. I could not remember any more what it was. I know how she is, I said. We'll talk another time. Are you okay? I'm fine, Aaron. Are you going to reschedule with the university? I'll let you know, I said, and I ended the call. I did not reschedule with the university. I called them privately and rescheduled under my name only, and then I called my attorney, a methodical woman named Renata who had handled my estate planning for 15 years and who asked no unnecessary questions. I want to restructure the scholarship fund, I told her, more formally than we originally planned. How formally? She said. Permanently, I said. Renata had questions, good ones. She walked me through the legal architecture of a private scholarship fund, the options for a trust structure, the implications of different governance models. I took notes. I had always taken notes. Alina used to joke that I took notes on our dates. She was not entirely wrong about that either. As Renata and I talked through the options, I felt my plan crystallizing, not in a flash but slowly, the way ice forms on a still pond, a layer at a time. Quiet and hard and cold. There was a moment sitting in Renata's office 2 days later when she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, Daniel, I want to ask you something personal. Go ahead, I said. Is this about the scholarship or is this about something else? I looked at her for a moment. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive, I said. She nodded slowly. Just want to make sure you're building something, not burning something. I thought about that. I thought about Alina's face in the photograph. I'm building, I said. I'm just being very careful about who it belongs to. But even as I said it, I knew Renata had touched something real. My obsessiveness was showing. I was going home every night and sitting at my desk and rewriting clauses, adjusting stipulations, adding layers of specificity that went far beyond what the scholarship actually needed. I added a requirement that the fund's program director must have a personal connection to first-generation college students. I added a provision that the annual ceremony must include a reading from Alina's published academic papers. I added a governance structure so detailed that Renata told me it was the most airtight private scholarship agreement she had ever seen. You're leaving no room for interference, she observed. No, I agreed, I'm not. The question of who should be co-trustee was the one I circled longest. It had to be someone who understood Alina, someone who understood what she had given and why, someone whose connection to the scholarship was not about proximity to me or to Aaron but about genuine continuity with what Alina had actually stood for. I made a list the way I always do and crossed names off one by one, and then I thought of Sophia Reyes. I had not thought of her in a few years, but Alina had mentioned her often in the last years of her life. Sophia had been one of her students in the late 90s, a young woman from a poor family who had enormous academic ability and absolutely no resources to develop it. Alina had tutored her for free for 2 years, she had written her recommendation letters, she had helped her apply for grants. Sophia had gone on to get a degree, then a graduate degree, and was now working in educational nonprofit development in the city. Alina had called her once the best argument for what I do. I found Sophia's contact information through the university's alumni network and I sent her a letter, not an email, a letter, on paper, the way Alina would have done it. Sophia called me 3 days after the letter arrived. Her voice was warm and careful, the way a person sounds when they are moved but do not want to impose that on you. Mr. Marquez, she said, I cried reading your letter, I want you to know that. She thought the world of you, I said. There was a pause on the line. She changed my life, Sophia said. I don't say that lightly. I know you don't, I said. That's why I'm calling. We talked for an hour. By the end of it, she had agreed to be co-trustee and program director. I asked her to keep it private until the formal dedication paperwork was filed. She asked why. Because I want the announcement to speak for itself, I said, which was true. It was also not the whole truth, but I did not think Sophia needed to carry the weight of the whole truth. Meanwhile, the weeks passed. I attended Sunday dinners at Aaron and Leela's house with the same quiet composure I always showed there. Leela was relaxed, relieved even. She had decided, as I had expected her to decide, that I had backed down. He just needed to process it, I heard her telling someone on the phone one afternoon when I arrived early and stood in the hallway. You know how old men get attached to their ideas. He'll move on. I stood very still in the hallway and breathed slowly and walked into the living room and said, Hello, Leela, and watched her face do its quick performance of warmth. Daniel, you're early. Traffic was light, I said, and I sat down and I drank the tea she made and I said nothing at all about anything that mattered. Aaron called me a few times during those weeks and I could hear beneath his words the question he was not quite asking. Dad, are you doing okay? I'm great, Aaron. How are the kids? They're good. Dad, you're not still upset about the meeting thing, right? I'm not upset about anything, I said, which was in its own way the most accurate thing I had said in a while. Upset is not the word for what I was. Upset is a temporary thing. What I was building was not temporary. The dedication letter went out on a Thursday morning. Cream-colored envelope, university seal, formal heading. It went to the university stakeholders, to Sophia and to Aaron's address because Aaron was listed as a secondary family representative in the documentation. I knew Leela would open it. She opened everything that came to that house. It is not an accusation, it is just a fact. And I had written every word of that letter knowing exactly what she would see and in what order she would see it. I was at home when Aaron called. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the same spot where I had made my first decisions weeks ago. The phone rang and I looked at it and I let it ring twice before I picked up. Dad, Aaron's voice was strange, not angry, something more complicated than angry. I got the letter. I see, I said. You went ahead without telling us. I went ahead, I agreed. Dad, Sophia Reyes is listed as co-trustee. Sophia Reyes is the program director. Jeez. I don't even know her, I barely remember her. Your mother knew her very well, I said. That's what matters. There was a pause and then I heard in the background Leela's voice, sharp and close, tell him we need to talk about this. Tell him we're coming over. They arrived 40 minutes later. I had made a fresh pot of coffee. I had put out cups. I had set Alina's photograph in its usual place on the shelf and I had made sure it was facing the table where we would sit. These were deliberate choices. Everything was a deliberate choice by that point. Leela walked in first, which I expected, and she was carrying the letter, which I also expected. She held it the way a person holds a document they're prepared to argue about. Aaron came in behind her looking the way he always looked in these moments, which is to say he looked like a man who is hopping very hard that nobody will require anything of him. Sit down, I said. Both of you, I made coffee. I don't want coffee, Leela said. Leela, Aaron said. Sit down, I said again, pleasantly, and something in my tone must have communicated itself because she sat. Okay, she said, and she put the letter on the table between us. What is this? It's the dedication letter for the scholarship fund, I said. I can see that, she said. What I can't understand is why a stranger is named as co-trustee of a fund named after your wife while your own family is left out. Sophia isn't a stranger, I said. She was Alina's student. Alina helped her get to college. I know the story, Leela said. Aaron told me. But that doesn't explain why she gets to run this and not us. She's not running it instead of you, I said. She's running it instead of nobody. The fund needed a program director with real experience in educational development and a personal connection to the mission. Sophia has both. And I don't, do you? I said. The question sat there between us like something physical. Leela's expression tight. That's not fair, she said. You never even asked me to be involved. You've been planning this for weeks and you never included me. You were at the original meeting, I said. You told me I was leaving a mess. The words dropped into the room and everything went very still. Aaron looked at the table. Leela's jaw moved once like she was choosing between several things to say. I was frustrated, she finally said. We had concerns about the financial implications for the family. That wasn't me attacking you. It felt like attacking, I said quietly without heat. And more than that, Leela, it told me what you thought this was. You thought it was an ego project. You thought I was trying to play the hero. You thought Alina's memory was a mess. That is not what I said. It's what you meant, I said, and I heard it, and I made my decisions accordingly. Aaron looked up then. Dad, I understand you were hurt, but this feels like punishment, like you're purposely leaving Leela out to make a point. I'm not leaving anyone out, I said. I'm making sure the right people are in. Those are different things. Who decides who the right people are? Leela said. In this case, I do, I said. It's my fund, it's my wife's name, and it will go where Alina would have wanted it to go. Leela stood up, the chair scraped back. This is unbelievable, she said. You built something and you cut your own son's wife out of it publicly in a formal document and you want us to just accept that? I don't want anything from you, I said. That's actually the point. Aaron, Leela said, turning to him, are you going to say something? Aaron looked at me, then at Leela, then at his hands. Dad, he said slowly, why didn't you talk to me before all this? Why didn't you just call me and tell me what you were planning? That one landed differently because it was a real question, and because Aaron's voice when he asked it had something in it that was not anger. It was something quieter and more complicated than anger. It was the voice of someone who felt left out, and I recognized it because I had felt it too. I looked at my son for a long moment. I tried to, I said. You brought Leela to that meeting when I asked you to come alone. I didn't. You never said alone. I said it was a family meeting about your mother's legacy, I said, and you decided what family meant. Aaron was quiet. That's fair, he said very low. Leela made a sound that was not quite a word. There's something else, I said, in the documentation. I pulled a single page from the folder on the table beside me. I slid it across to Aaron. He picked it up and I watched his eyes move across it slowly. I watched them stop. I watched them move back to the beginning and read it again. The trust transfers to Sophia, he said. After you die, the full control transfers to Sophia. Yes, I said. Not to me, he said. Not to the family. The scholarship fund isn't a family asset, I said. It never was. It's Alina's legacy, and I've made sure it will stay that way. You could have left it to me, Aaron said, and his voice was very quiet now. I could have, I said, but I looked at your life, Aaron, and I thought about what would happen to this fund if I left it to you and Leela. And I decided Alina's name deserved better than that, not because I don't love you, but because this isn't about love, this is about what lasts. The silence that followed was the longest one of the evening. Leela had sat back down at some point during those last sentences, and now she was just looking at me and the tight little smile was completely gone. In its place was something I had not expected to see on her face. It took me a moment to identify it. It was the look of someone who has just understood something they cannot undo. You planned all of this, she said, not as an accusation, more like a realization. I planned the scholarship, I said. You made the other decisions yourself, she looked at Aaron. Aaron was still holding the page. He did not look at her, he looked at me. Dad, he said, I'm sorry about the meeting, about not saying anything when she said what she said. It was the last thing I had expected him to say. I had prepared for anger, I had prepared for argument, I had not prepared for that. I felt something shift in my chest, something that was not quite warmth and not quite sorrow but was somewhere between the two. I know, I said, I know you are. Leela left before the coffee was finished. She said she needed air. Aaron stayed. We sat at the table for a while without talking, and then Aaron looked at Alina's photograph on the shelf and said, she would have loved Sophia, wouldn't she? It was not quite a question. She did love Sophia, I said. She talked about her all the time in the last years. I didn't know that, Aaron said. I know, I said. That's why it matters. Aaron nodded slowly. He picked up his coffee cup. He put it down again. I've been a bad son, he said. No, I said. You've been a confused one. Those aren't the same thing. He looked at me. Is there a way back in, he said, into the fund, I don't know, back into your life in the way we used to be. I thought about that for a while. The fund belongs to Sophia and the scholarship committee, I said. That doesn't change, but you and I, that's a different document. We can write that one however we want. He exhaled. It sounded like he had been holding that breath for a while, maybe years. The scholarship launch ceremony took place on a Saturday afternoon in the university's main auditorium. I wore my dark suit, the same one I had worn to Lena's funeral, because it seemed right to close some kind of circle. Sophia spoke for 15 minutes and every word was true and specific and alive. She talked about what Alina had given her, not in abstractions but in details. She talked about the Tuesday afternoons in Alina's office. She talked about Alina buying her a calculus textbook because Sophia had been too proud to say she could not afford it. She talked about opening the acceptance letter from the university and calling Alina first before her own mother, because Alina was the one who had made it possible. There were people in the audience who had never known Alina who were crying. I sat in the third row and I felt, for the first time in 8 years, that she was genuinely present in the room, not as a photograph. Not as a memory I had to work to hold, but as something living. I left before the speeches were over. I know that sounds strange, but I had done what I came to do and I did not want the rest of it. I did not want the reception and the handshakes and the people telling me what a beautiful tribute it was. I had made it for Alina. I had made it for Sophia and for every student who would come after her. I had not made it to be thanked. I walked out through the side door and into the afternoon light, and I stood on the steps for a moment and I breathed in the autumn air, which smelled like leaves and something faintly sweet that I could not identify, and I felt very old and also very clear. My obsessiveness had built something real. My stubbornness had protected something worth protecting. My coldness, the thing that Alina used to say scared her when it showed up, had this one time been used in service of something she would have recognized. I do not know if that is redemption. I do not think it works that way, but it was something. Months went by. The scholarship awarded its first 3 recipients in the spring. Sophia sent me photographs from the ceremony with a handwritten note that said, 3 students who will change the world. Alina would have loved them. I put the note with Alina's photograph. It seemed like the right place. Renata called to confirm that all the legal structures were properly filed. Airtight, she said, just like you wanted. Thank you, I said. Daniel, she said, for what it's worth, I think you built something good. I think so too, I said, and I meant it. Aaron came to visit me more often after that winter. Just Aaron sometimes. He and Leela were in couples counseling, which he mentioned once carefully, the way you mentioned something you are not sure you should mention. I told him I thought that was a good idea. We did not talk much about the scholarship or about Leela or about that evening at my kitchen table. We talked about other things, about the grandchildren, about a trip I was thinking about taking to Portugal, a place Alina had always wanted to go. About a book Aaron had read that he thought I would like. It was the way things used to be before the years of drift. Not quite the same, but recognizable, a door that had been almost closed sitting open again by an inch. I was not going to force it wider, I had learned that, but I was not going to let it close either. As for Leela, she was still there, of course. She would always be there at least as long as she and Aaron were together, and I thought they probably would stay together because Aaron had made his choice and he was working on understanding what it had cost him. She was polite to me when I saw her. I was polite back. We did not discuss the scholarship. We did not discuss that evening. Once at a birthday dinner for one of the grandchildren, I caught her looking at me from across the table with an expression that was complicated and hard to read. I held her gaze for a moment. Then I looked back at the birthday cake because my granddaughter was about to blow out the candles, and some things are more important than any of the rest of it. I had learned that the hardest way. 8 years of Tuesday mornings without Alina, and I had learned it in my bones. Not every fight needs to be finished. Not every wound needs a name. Some things you just carry. And some things, if you're careful and patient and willing to be a little cold when the moment calls for it, you get to give away. You get to hand them to someone younger, someone who will carry them forward, someone whose life was changed by a woman who bought a calculus textbook on a Tuesday afternoon because she believed that the one thing nobody could take from you was what you knew. I had not built a legacy. I had not in the end built a revenge. What I had built was a continuation. And that, I decided, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that was almost cold, looking at a photograph of a woman who was laughing at something I could no longer remember, was enough. It was more than enough, it was everything.